So this case shows that your case isn't over until it's really over. This was a routine cataract case. I had completed my nuclear disassembly, and during the very first or last part of capsular removal, I realized some lens fibers on the posterior capsule and decided I would polish them for good results. While polishing, I was in a bit of a hurry, and as you will see right now, I nipped the posterior capsule with my aspiration cannula and caused a rent or a tear in the posterior capsule. Most important thing is for the surgeon to realize the complication as soon as it happens. And once you realize there's a rent in the posterior capsule, don't remove your irrigation cannula until you pressurize the anterior chamber with OVD. I assessed the situation, and my first decision was to turn this rent into a posterior Capsulorhexis, which I was able to partially complete. And then, after thinking that I was done with my rhexis, I sweep in with my spatula and I realize that there is vitreous prolapse, as evidenced here by the blood-tinged vitreous prolapsing from the main incision. So I decided not to attempt to complete or to continue with my posterior rhexis, as I was worried that if I try, the whole back complex can be compromised and I wouldn't be able to implant an IOL in the posterior chamber nor the bag, and I would have had to go either with an iris claw, scleral fixation, or an anterior chamber IOL. And my decision was to start my anterior vitrectomy, and these are the basics of anterior vitrectomy. You should always be very suspicious that the vitreous will be prolapsing from areas of least resistance, which are the main incision and the side ports. You want to keep your cutting rate to be as high as possible, with irrigation as low as possible, vacuum and aspiration flow rates lower or very low as well, in the range of maybe 10 or 5 for your aspiration flow rate, and around maybe 150 for your vacuum. So after sweeping underneath the main incision and removing the prolapse vitreous, you need to debulk the prolapse vitreous from the vitreous cavity by going deeper, so that you isolate the anterior vitreous, and then you sweep through the anterior chamber from deep to superficial, both using your right hand and then switching to your left in order to make sure that all vitreous is removed. It is always more tricky, and there's always some vitreous left, so always keep a very high index of suspicion that vitreous is still there. Complete vitreous removal is very important, and once you've achieved that, again, do not remove your irrigation cannula until you pressurize the anterior chamber to prevent vitreous from prolapsing once again. And since the posterior capsulorhexis was not complete, I decided to implant a multi-piece or a 3-piece IOL into the sulcus. I enlarged my wound. I very slowly injected the leading haptic, making sure it is in the sulcus above the anterior capsule, and very slowly unfolded or continued with the injection, keeping the trailing haptic prolapsing out of the wound, because sometimes you are not sure if the leading haptic is in the proper position. Having the trailing haptic outside the eye prevents the IOL from dropping. And then very slowly and very cautiously rotate your multi-piece IOL, or the trailing haptic of your multi-piece IOL, into place into the posterior or posterior chamber or the sulcus, making sure that the anterior haptic remains in the sulcus as well, preventing any dropping of the IOL.